They say a man shouldn't cry in the desert. But the day Miles Brennan found her, half-conscious, tied to a splintered post with dried blood on her temple and 2 crying newborns at her feet, something inside him shattered. The Mojave sun was unforgiving that day, scorching the earth beneath his boots. But it wasn't the heat that got to him. It wasn't the quiet either. Miles had lived off in isolation for 5 years, near Joshua Tree, and never resented the quiet. What shattered him was the crying of those babies. Weak, soft wails, like they were already throwing up their hands and quitting. And the way she didn't, not even when death was near enough she could taste it. Out here in the desert, you encounter things you never forget. Cattle rustlers, drifters with bad whiskey and worse fortune. But this was something different. This wasn't desperation or chance, this was purpose. Someone had bound a woman and her twin daughters out in the open, left them to die in the blistering sun with no more than a note. No reason, no mercy, just tossed aside like garbage. Miles didn't know her name, didn't know her history, and he didn't care. He unwound the ropes that bound her, tucked the babies into his shirt to protect them from the sun, and scooped her up into his arms. She felt like nothing, like the world had already released her. In his cabin, he did what he could. He fed the babies goat's milk, wrapped the woman in wool, and tended the fire. No questions, no sermons, just heat, water, and living. And when she finally broke her silence, her voice a scratch of wind over gravel, all she said was, "Don't let them take my girls." Miles didn't ask who they were. He just nodded. Because in a world where men abandon mothers to die, someone needs to stand on the other side. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, still in his boots, listening to the rise and fall of her breath. Outside, the desert wind wore at the cabin walls. Inside, it seemed as though even time was standing still. She came to by morning, eyes half open, sandpaper voice. Introduced herself as Grace.
No Sernam.
Did not require one. Miles nodded once. That was sufficient. Then she told him something that made the hairs rise on the back of his neck. "They'll come looking. They always do." Miles didn't flinch, just gave her a tin cup of hot water and sat there. She looked into it as if it contained all the memories she'd attempted to forget. As it happens, Grace had a husband, but it wasn't a life, it was a sentence. Her husband perished in a blaze. Some called it an accident. Others whispered it wasn't. Following that, his family altered. They became churchy, sort of, but the kind where damnation is discussed more than salvation. Her father-in-law was a preacher out of a secret church in the Arizona desert. Caleb Whitmore. Silver hair, black eyes, crackling voice like thunder. He taught that women were created to endure suffering and girls were curses rather than blessings. When the twin daughters were born to Grace, he labeled it divine retribution. Spoke of an angry God. Before she knew it, she was in the bed of a wagon. No shoes, no farewell. Just rope burn on wrists and the scorching wind of the desert blowing in her face. "They were going to leave me for dead," she said, her eyes fixed blankly on the wall. Maybe they already did. Miles did not say much, just went out and chopped wood harder than he had in years. When he returned, he gave her a folded flannel shirt. She did not ask if it was clean. She just held it like it counted. Outside, 3 crows flew overhead. Inside, the twins slept quietly in front of the stove. But peace does not stay long in such places. 2 days later, there was a low dust plume on the canyon road. Miles was out in back splitting kindling when he saw it, too low and even to be natural wind. That was horse dust. He wrung his brow, rested on his axe, and waited. 3 riders, too distant to make out their faces, close enough to feel it in his belly. He entered the cabin, quiet and composed. Grace was folding cloth diapers at the fire. The twins were beginning to cry, pink-cheeked with the heat. "They're here," he stated. She didn't inquire who. She already knew. They didn't ride quickly or noisily, just rode in slowly, like they owned every inch of ground they rode over. The bearded man in front was Caleb Whitmore, her father-in-law, preacher, executioner. Behind him were 2 hard-faced cousins, cold and sharp eyes like jagged rock. Caleb didn't even get off his horse. He just stared right through Miles and said, "That woman is mine." Miles didn't flinch. He stepped down from the porch like a man who already had his mind made up. "She's not property," he stated bluntly. "She's not yours. She's family now." Caleb's lip curled into a sneer. "She was family," he spat. "She stole something that don't belong to her." "You mean the babies?" Miles asked, steady voice. "Born under a curse," Caleb growled. "But it isn't too late to repair the damage." That was all. Something flickered in Miles' eyes, like an outlaw taking measurement to a grave. "No," he said slowly. "But too late for you." Caleb's hand twitched toward his rifle. But Miles had already stepped forward, unarmed, not even raising his voice, just standing with the kind of quiet certainty that makes other men pause. "You fire one shot," he said, his voice calm as desert stone. "You better not miss." The silence stretched. Then Caleb smirked. "You'll regret this." "No," Miles replied. "You will." The three riders spun without another word. But everyone knew what that silence translated to. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't be coming to talk. That evening Miles reinforced each window and secured the cabin door. Grace sat at the table feeding the babies, her hands steady, her face colorless. "You didn't have to stand up to him," she whispered. "I didn't do it for you," Miles replied. He gazed at the babies, sleeping and wrapped in their swaddles. "I did it for them. There are some men who wait their entire lives for a moment to be of use, and others just spot a storm brewing and start constructing a wall. And if you've made it this far, still listening, still here, perhaps you've got a little storm fighter in you as well. If stories like these resonate, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Keeps the fire burning and the stories alive. A week went by, but the shadow Caleb cast never really dissipated. Each time a crow sailed low across the sky, Grace winced. Each time Miles was slow to come home, her breath hitched. But the babies, only they grew. Their cheeks flushed pinker, their lungs more robust. They laughed in their sleep, as if the world had never attempted to steal their mother away. And for a time, life's rhythm came back. Miles mended fences. Grace made shirts out of flour sacks. They ate beans and cornbread, sat on the porch when the heat finally broke. Miles never asked what had happened to her. He just left her alone. And in the quiet, something started to heal, slow, but true. But Mojave peace is like summer rain, short-lived and quickly shattered. A dust-covered rider came through one afternoon, bound for San Bernardino. He left a note, Grace's name scribbled in diagonal ink across it. It was from her cousin out of Colorado. They'd heard about what occurred, told her there was land available. A house, a roof that wasn't leaking, a nursemaid for the girls, a future. And if she didn't go soon, she could still make the last train east in 4 days. Grace didn't cry. That night, she just sat still on the porch, letter in her lap, as the sun dissolved into the Joshua trees. Miles came up behind her, saw the letter, but said nothing. She waited, finally, and asked soft as could be, "You want me to stay?" Miles never looked at her. He just said, "I want you to want to stay." That evening, Grace slept fitfully between the twins, hearing their small breaths. She was thinking of the road, of safety, of a new beginning, but also of the man who never asked her for a thing and yet gave her all she didn't even know she lacked. And in some sort of silence, she came to see, it isn't always necessary to start over by leaving. Sometimes it's necessary to start over by staying. The train never noticed her. Grace never packed, never saddled the horse. She simply got up early, brewed coffee, fed the girls, and sat silently on the porch repairing a shirt Miles had left behind. Sometimes the greatest choices aren't made in speeches. They're made with a needle, a torn sleeve, and a still morning. Miles asked no more, no longer needed to. The next afternoon, he etched her name in the porch beam. Small, simple, enough that this house knew who occupied it now. Peace doesn't last very long in environments where evil remembers how. That Friday, a dust storm blew in, and along with it, the Whitmore family. 5 riders, all of them armed. Caleb at the center, still wearing black, still with that vinegar tone, and this time not here to chat. Miles saw them from the bluff, reached for his rifle, said nothing. Grace was sitting on the porch, one baby on her hip, the other sleeping indoors. "They're not here to frighten us," she said. "No," Miles said. "They're here to stop it." The riders reined their horses down with the slow self-assurance of men who feel they own the earth under their feet. Caleb moved forward and stared toward the porch. "I gave you warning," he said icily. "You've chosen your side." Miles did not answer. He merely dropped the rifle and stepped into the dust. Then one of Caleb's men, twitchy, too quick on the trigger, thin, stood up, raised his shotgun and fired. Boom! Missed wide, sending dirt flying and sending the goats grazing out back into panicked flight. But before they could even start to react, there was a crack from the ridge. A rifle shot, clean and straight through the twitchy man's hand. He let out a scream, dropped the shotgun, blood seeping into the desert sand. Then 5 additional riders rode up out of the canyon nearby. Neighbors, rifles at the ready, eyes steady. Caleb surveyed. Outgunned, outnumbered, exposed. "You came armed with a posse," he growled. Miles didn't blink. No, they came in themselves. And then Grace came down off the porch, baby still on hip, face as calm as stone. "If you take one step closer to this house," she told him, voice steady and unshakable, "you're not a preacher. You're just a coward with a sermon as cover." The silence that followed was harder than any bullet. Caleb's jaw went tight. He glanced at Grace, at the rifle-carrying men, at his own bleeding rider, and he knew the old ways no longer were welcome here. Without speaking, he faced his horse and rode away. The others did the same. But one, Juan, the youngest, glanced over at Grace and doffed his hat before vanishing into dust. At night, the fire remained constant. The girls slumbered soundly, and Miles sat with Grace on the porch, whittling another name on the beam there, his own. She glanced over and smiled. "Planting roots now?" Miles gave a nod. "Just reminding this house who we are. Because sometimes, it's not about the blood you share that makes you family. It's who's standing right next to you when the world shows up for your peace. And perhaps that's the true story here. Love isn't loud. It isn't perfect. It doesn't have promises or parades. It just shows up and stays. So now I've got to ask, if someone came for your peace, would you stand? And if news like this reminds you what's most important, hit that like button. Subscribe for more. And let me know down in the comments. If you were Grace, would you have stayed? Because sometimes the quietest love fights the loudest wars.